To the Breakfast Club right here on Asake. My name is Fungai Mawada, and as usual, the Breakfast Club seeks to bring issues which are pertinent to our hearts closer to home and for us to understand essentially what is going on in the country that we live in. So as you know, Zimbabwe is one of the biggest informal economies in the world. And in 2021, the World Bank predicted that the economy would grow by 3.9%, even though poverty remains at a high, with hundreds of families earning as little as $30 per month. In January, of course, a report came out from the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe, which reported a family of 6 required close to 72,797 bond, which, according to today's rates, is close to $200 for the upkeep of families. As you know, prices have been going up. Some people have indicated that maybe it's because of the war in Ukraine. Some have looked at inflation as a whole. But in order to tackle this issue this morning, I am joined by Comfort Muchekeza, who is the regional officer for Matabeleland from the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe. Good morning, sir, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So maybe to begin with, I know a lot of people are curious about how do you calculate the bread basket for a family when it comes to Consumer Council of Zimbabwe?
Yes, we have received the same question from quite a number of organizations. They would want to understand what components do we consider when coming up with the bread basket. The bread basket, people should understand that each time when we talk about the requirement for the family of 6, we are talking about the minimum requirement. So our bread basket then becomes the bottom line. Otherwise, all things being equal, we would want to consider quite a number of things which we used to consider as luxuries, but today they are no longer luxuries. So coming up with a bread basket, we talk about roller meal, 40 kgs roller meal a month. We talk about margarines, about 4 by 500 grams a month. We talk about cabbages, talk about fresh milk, talk about 4 kg sugar. So what we consider so minimum. And we also consider issues of accommodation, where we say a family, just to say we are somehow sheltered, they should have at least 3 rooms, and in the high density suburbs. We'll say for 3 rooms, there will be possibly a kitchen, a sitting room, which will also be a bedroom for the kids and bedroom for the parents. So what we consider the very basic minimum. Transport will also factor in transport, and transport will only consider for 1 person. Where we say the father will be going to work.
The breadwinner,
essentially. The breadwinner, yes, will be going to work. We also assume school-going children will be learning at local schools where they will need no transport. And we then calculate our transport cost using the ZUBCO fares. So you'll find that even when we say 72,000, we are trying to bring everything to say we are going for the cheapest, for the cheapest. But if we'll just say at random, what is it which is required, it will go beyond what we always project.
Okay, very interesting. And then considering, and I like how you highlighted ZUBCO. I know that a lot of people have been having issues with getting the ZUBCO bus as well, and now resorting to other means of transportation, which are higher than the ZUBCO bus costs. And then also looking at how Zimbabwe essentially has an inflation problem, right? How often do you review the bread basket when it comes to Zimbabwe?
Currently, we carry out our price surveys every week. But since the Ukraine-Russia conflicts, we are considering having it twice because the prices are going up as often as twice or 3 times a week. But for the purpose of publishing, we normally publish the bread basket once a month. But in between, consumers can check with us to say, you've carried out the survey this week. What's the bread basket you've carried out? Because we do out surveys on a weekly basis.
Okay, very interesting. All right, so the CCZ has its origins in the noble cause of protecting and empowering its consumers. However, a lot of people would differ maybe with this perspective, particularly if we look at how food, fuel, and even data prices are significantly on the increase. So people would ask Kuti, where is the lobbying? Where is the advocacy from the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe?
Yes, the lobbying and advocacy from the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe. To start with, the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe believes that an informed consumer is a protected consumer. We would want to fight this battle collectively with consumers. Yes, we represent consumers, but we don't want to go it alone. So our most effective tool, which we have been using over the years, is to educate consumers, inform consumers, so that consumers can make informed decisions. If all consumers would stand up, because when we talk about consumers, we've got consumer rights and we also have consumer responsibilities. Once consumers start exercising those rights and responsibilities, it will be much easier, even for the council to represent the consumers. But I would want consumers also to understand what Consumer Council have gone through over the years. We have lobbied and advocated for consumer protective legislations. Over the years, we managed to have quite a number of laws. One would think about the Small Claim Court. One could think about the Consumer Contract Act, which was then repealed by the Consumer Protection Act, and quite a number of other legislations. But of late, we lobbied for the Consumer Protection Act, Chapter 1414, and it's now a law. It's a comprehensive law which gives all the consumer protection which any consumer can want. There are issues of redress, there are almost everything. It's a comprehensive piece of legislation.
All right, so coming to those issues of redress, are those issues being tackled in Zimbabwe? And as a council, do you have the muscle to prosecute issues in Zimbabwe?
As a council, yes, no. Yes, in the sense that I've talked about the Consumer Protection Act, Chapter 1414. The Consumer Protection Act talks about the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe playing the role of arbitration. And those are the muscles which Consumer Council have been asking for over the years. Currently, the Act is in place. There is also the Consumer Protection Commission, which was born because of the Consumer Protection Act. And that commission now is the regulatory body of all consumer-related issues. So in terms of consumer issues being redressed in Zimbabwe, I think we're almost there. Yes.
Okay, very interesting. So would you care to give us examples of some of the issues that you perhaps have tackled and have solved as the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe?
We have solved quite a number of issues. Those who are in the retail sector will know very well how often we visit them. And each time we get there, because of the relationship which we have also made between the retailers, the consumers, and ourselves, they now understand once we get there, we don't even have any hassle. Consumers have managed to get redresses. As I was coming here, another consumer managed to just get redress of 230 years. He bought a grass mower and the machine was not working well. Sent it back to the supplier. It was returned to him almost 3-4 times until the consumer then say, I've given you enough. I can't take it anymore. Can I have my refund? And you collect. Because the Consumer Protection Act talks about that. The consumer was given his money back.
Okay, and I think you highlighted a very key point that perhaps consumers don't really know their rights when it comes to complaints and the like. So what are some of the steps that consumers should take in voicing complaints with the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe? Or are there particular issues depending on what you want to ask, perhaps?
What normally consumers have to do, possibly, initially I talked about where we inform consumers, we educate consumers. There could be consumers who are not taking up the issues because they are not aware that their rights are being violated. They just think that's the norm in Zimbabwe. So, assuming consumers now know their rights, In terms of complaint procedure, we expect that the consumer first discusses with the supplier, identifies the problem. If the supplier can attend to it, we are happy. If the supplier cannot attend to that, then the consumer comes to our office. What would require from that consumer is just the information relating to the transactions. Do we have an invoice? Do we have a receipt? Even if they are not there, we have get quite a number of supermarkets. At the exit, there is somebody who collects the receipts, throws them in a card box or a bin there. So even if there is no receipt, we will also want to say, can the consumer give information beyond reasonable doubt that the transaction did occur? Then that's all we require. Yes.
Okay, very interesting. And in your opinion, are consumers aware of their rights in Zimbabwe? And what can we do to make sure that there's education in terms of people understanding their rights and how to lobby and to get justice, essentially, when it comes to them getting services in Zimbabwe?
Consumers are not really aware of their rights. They are not really aware of their rights. Yes, people talk about Zimbabwe having a high literacy rate, but in terms of consumer education, we are still a way to go. The way to go is that the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe believes that the media house is our mouthpiece. Once we have good rapport, good relationship with the media houses, they invite us, like what you did today. We start talking about consumerism. That's one way of educating consumers. While at the same time, we also do some visits, be it schools, churches, communities, or workplaces, where we address consumers on their rights. But I think using the media, whether print or electronic media, is the best way to go.
Okay. And you spoke on a certain issue which I find really interesting. Is consumerism still active in Zimbabwe in the first place? Considering our economy and how it's mostly an informal market, so to speak, is consumerism alive in Zimbabwe?
Consumerism is alive in Zimbabwe. And it's even getting more interesting. In most cases, when everything is fine, no one would want to look at their rights. But once things seem to be somewhere abnormal, then people start to question everything. Because people don't have money. They would want to count every cent and then say, what I've spent, did I get value for it? So that's the beginning of consumerism. So consumerism is becoming more interesting, more so with the enactment of the Consumer Protection Act. It will also allow other players besides the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe. We are looking at other players who also having interest in consumerism.
Okay.
Yes.
So maybe you can just take us briefly through the Consumer Act. What is in that Consumer Act?
What's in the Consumer Act? It first talks about the issues about the commission itself, the establishment of the commission. Then it talks about the consumer rights. From the consumer rights, it then talks about issues of redress. To say if rights have been violated, they have to be redressed. It also removes things like disclaimer clauses, where we find goods left at owner's risk, all those things. It also even talks about the issues of pricing, to say there have to be clear labeling of pricing. It also gives consumer rights what they call the cooling off period, to say consumer can decide to buy a product, possibly out of excitement, later on realizes, but this thing I don't really need it. Consumers are then given that right also to return it. It also deals with issues which are common, no return, no refunds, no guarantee, all those things according to the Act they are no longer there.
All right. Funny you should highlight that about no returns and no refunds. And I was actually thinking about how you find a lot of foreign-owned shops, whether it's Indians and Nigerians and the likes. Their number one thing when you enter their shops is no returns, no refunds. How does the Consumer Council work with such establishments, which aren't really formally established establishments, so to speak?
Wherever it's written no return, no refunds, to us it's just a writing, because I've always told consumers that there could be a law in this house, or I'll come up with my own law. There is no problem. As a household, I can come up with my own laws. But as long as those laws are not subject to national laws, my law means nothing. So if one will write, say, no return, no refund, while least we have the Act of Parliament, which says it's illegal, then the law from a shop, that regulation from a shop is null and void.
Okay, very interesting. Now I know my rights. And then, of course, in recent years, there's been a lot of talk of how people should have an uptake of perhaps locally made and sourced goods and products and the like. How do you feel that uptake has been, particularly as people consider locally made products as substandard sometimes, whether we look at food products or consumables and the likes? How has the uptake been of locally sourced products, and are they up to standard, essentially, as the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe in that regard?
Yes, the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe supports the Buy Zimbabwe campaign. We really encourage consumers to buy locally manufactured products, locally produced goods. We support that. But at the same time, we then encourage the producers, the suppliers, to say, while least we all agree that consumers should buy locally produced goods, but locally produced goods must also match the standard. They should not be inferior when compared to imported products. So they have to be matched in terms, if not better, in terms of the product quality. They also have to be competitive when it comes to pricing. We will not want to encourage consumers to buy more expensive locally produced goods, which will be of inferior quality. But if producers can produce good quality food products and give them to consumers at a competitive price, we are traveling together. That's what we want. Yes.
We've almost come to the end of our show. So maybe what words of encouragement would you like to give consumers as well as retailers and essentially people who are operating in this Zimbabwe that we have currently?
Possibly I want to start with retailers. Retailers should always know that Consumer Council of Zimbabwe regard retailers and consumers as equal partners. The consumers, they need retailers as much as retailers also need consumers. So we should always be on an equal footing. At the same time, retailers should always strive to give the best to the consumers. There is no justification for a consumer to go and buy in Botswana, in South Africa, in Zambia, while the same product is being produced here. So we encourage retailers, producers, suppliers, all those who deal with consumers to say, try your best to supply the best, so that consumers will not even think of crossing the street. We have also local retailers, possibly from the suburbs, where most of the consumers stay. We also want to encourage them to say, why should consumer buy bread and milk from the CBD, while they have the same shops in their localities? So those retailers in the locality, they should also match what the retailers in the CBD are doing, so that consumers will just buy from them. Yes. When there is a problem, okay is always there. And okay have structures to say there is a problem with okay shops. There is a structure there, but the mushrooming of these shops, others are selling even from the boots of their cars, others just get an open place, they start selling. If there is a serious problem, that car won't come back again tomorrow, and consumers tend to lose. Even when we talk about flea markets, because they are not even licensed, if the flea market operator decides not to come tomorrow, you cannot even identify that. But when you deal with established shops, even not as big as OK's, the small shops in Geta, Popoma, number one, as long as it's a licensed shop, even if the person whom you deals with today is no longer there tomorrow, the shop will be there and you will find somebody to assist you. So that's the challenge we have. While least we encourage the small and medium operators, but I believe they should always operate within the framework of the law. They should get registered. They should also get proper places to conduct their businesses. Currently, you see people selling things like even meat in the streets. But when you talk about meat, an ordinary shop which is licensed cannot sell meat. You say you have to have a license of a butchery, it has to be inspected. You find people even selling things like sada, lunches also. Yes, it's cheaper. But under normal circumstances, the requirement you say anyone who deals with food must go through certain processes, the health, we've got contagious diseases, which can be transmitted just from handling of food. So all those are issues which also need to be attended to. While listed at the same time, we know that we are more of an informal market, but it should be informal in the sense that everyone is coming in, but standards should be maintained.
Okay, and how do consumers enforce that essentially? How can we help get to that point where I don't risk my hard-earned money and my health as well by going to these informal things? How do I make sure that this happens at the end of the day?
Things like this, they're beyond the control of the consumer. They really want serious enforcement, like the Zetara police or the local authority through their health department and the municipal policies. But an ordinary officer walking in, because even when we say somebody should be arrested for in a shop, it's not putting handcuffs, but just the issue of issuing a ticket. But how can you issue a ticket to a vendor? Tomorrow that vendor won't be there. So when you deal with issues like vendors and this, then they want really enforcement where you say you have to take the person, goes with him at the charge office. So I think that one, it's more to do with the police. But what we can do at the same time is to educate consumer about the dangers of dealing with such businesses. What makes these people continue to be in the street is that there is lucrative business. But if consumers will then say, I will not buy meat from the streets, vendors will not bring that meat. So consumers have also have a role to play, rather than just enforcing to say don't sell. Why can't we say don't buy?
Okay, thank you so much. And we look forward, of course, to seeing the CCZ in action in protecting the rights of consumers. And maybe my last question is, when we always used to grow up with this, which is the customer is always king. Do you believe that the customer is always king as the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe?
I don't only believe, but I know the customer is always the king. In the sense that those who are in business, before they even open up, they will just start saying, are they customers in this area? What's the potential of them buying all those things? They will look at the customer, that customer-based survey. So every business needs a customer. But customers can do without that other business. Yes, they can try to make other means, but the business can't make any means. They need a customer. So a customer is always a key.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Muchekeza, for coming to our show. Thank you so much for taking out time and to explain how the bread basket officially works. I hope you enjoyed today's edition of The Breakfast Club. Please make sure you join us again tomorrow for another exciting show of The Breakfast Club. And please don't forget to follow us on all social media sites, where it's Site ZW on Instagram, Facebook, as well as on Twitter. From myself, Fungai, see you next time.